It's time to talk fantasy football bus here at Sporting News, and I'm Vinny Iyer, and joining me is Matt Lutowski, and we want to bring you the guys that we would like to avoid in our fantasy football drafts based on their current ADP and ranking. And Matt, I'm going to start with quarterbacks here, and one guy that I think is too rich for my blood. He's rich for years now with his new contract, Kyler Murray. I'm just not buying him as the high-end QB1. He's just off the top tier of guys that you look at going number 5 or number 6 at quarterback. I'm just not buying the fact that he's suddenly going to bump up here without DeAndre Hopkins for a while. So he's a guy that I have on my list. And then I'm looking at Russell Wilson here. The hype is too much for me with the Broncos. He's getting used to all these new receivers. I'm not sure what you're going to get from that offense. So those are the guys in that middle tier that I'm avoiding, Murray and Wilson. Who are you thinking that you want to avoid, Matt?
Yeah, well, speaking to those two guys first, I think they have the same problem, which is they don't run nearly as much anymore. And when you think of guys like that, you think of them padding their stats, raising their floors, raising their ceilings with their running game. They just don't do it as much. Murray down about 20 yards last year compared to the year before. Same with Wilson. If they run again, they'll be back up there. If they don't, they're going to be, like you said, more mid-tier to lower starting tier guys. And for the prices they're going, that's just a little too much. The guy that I'm looking at, that I'm worried about, kind of the same logic, same reason, Lamar Jackson. He didn't run as much last year. The touchdown to interception ratio was terrible. And he's a guy I'm a little worried about. And you take away Hollywood Brown from him, I don't know what you're going to get this year.
I agree with you, Matt. You got to be careful on these running quarterbacks. People say it's a cheat code, but if they're not running enough, you're not going to get the value that you're looking for. You might as well wait and get some of those guys that you can get later that they're traditional pocket passers that you know are going to produce. Now, let's look at the running back bus here. I've got a few guys on my list. Number 1 is James Conner. It's hard to duplicate that season, staying in that Cardinals backfield. I just don't see James Conner also staying healthy enough to put up the same numbers he had. People are looking at him without Chase Edmonds in there, but I just don't see a career you're duplicating, especially with the touchdown regression probably on the way. And another guy that I look at is Javonta Williams. We want him to be that guy in year 2. He's got a lot of talent, but he's still got to worry about Melvin Gordon. We know how frustrating that was. So I don't think you can go all in on Javonta Williams so high as a RB1 borderline or a high-end RB2.
Yeah, no, Javonte Williams is that guy that everyone is almost collectively agreed that he's going to take over. Melvin Gordon's done. Well, Melvin Gordon actually had better yards per carry last year, so we can't say that for sure. And you got a new offense in Denver. You never know what's going to happen. I like Javonte Williams. He is just going a little bit too high for my blood. James Conner, I think you're right. 18 touchdowns last year, stayed mostly healthy. That just seems like it's not going to repeat. But a guy that I'm also a little bit worried about, not so much worried about as I am just looking at his ranking, looking at his ADP going, are we sure about that? Is Cam Akers. Obviously coming off the very serious injury, missed pretty much all of last regular season, and then was absolutely terrible in the postseason, averaged 2.5 yards per carry. They gave him a lot of carries, though, so I guess that's a good sign. But then you have Darrell Henderson there. You have Kieran Williams, the rookie there. I don't know. I just look at him going as a borderline almost RB1 or at least a high-end RB2. I'm just not sure he's there. Why do we think he's that good, Vinny?
Yeah, I think I feel the same way about David Montgomery. He's supposed to be the guy. They're supposed to improve their running game in Chicago with the outside zone. But to me, I think Khalil Herbert is just more of an explosive back here. Same thing. Do you want Montgomery grinding out, really struggling to get to 4 yards per carry, much like Akers did? No, thank you. I want some guy that's going to be a little bit more efficient there if I'm going to invest highly in an RB2. All right, now it's time to look at the wide receiver potential bust here in fantasy football. And Matt, I'm going to go big to start out here. Tyreek Hill, I just don't think he's going to live up to the expectations here as the Dolphins' number 1 receiver. He's going to find out that Tua Tagovailoa cannot throw the deep ball the same way as Patrick Mahomes. He's also got to worry about 2 guys that Tua likes a little bit more than him right now, Jalen Waddle and Mike Gaseki. So that's a concern for me in that offense. And I also think the Dolphins are going to be rather run heavy. Another one is DJ Moore. I just am not excited about ever drafting this guy because he doesn't score touchdowns. I'm not sure what the connection is going to be with Baker Mayfield. Baker came really late into the process. Another quarterback change here for Carolina. So I'm going to stay away from Tyreek and DJ on my end.
Yeah, I'm not quite as down on either of them as you are. Obviously, Tyreek, we get the worry there with the quarterback shift. There's no doubt it's a downgrade. Everyone can agree to that. But I will say this, he started becoming more of a possession receiver last year. His average depth of target was 43rd in the NFL. It went way down. Yards per catch went way down. So I don't know. Can he fit into that Dolphins offense with that kind of role and then do what he does after the catch with his elite speed? But it does seem redundant, him and Jalen Waddle, and I do worry how that's going to work. So for as high as he's going, I am slightly worried. And with DJ Moore, I think he kind of is what he is. There's always the potential for more touchdowns for a guy who gets that many targets. I think the problem is, and we were talking a little bit off camera about this, is that people are drafting him as if he's going to score 8 touchdowns, 7 touchdowns, and we just haven't seen it yet. So until he does that, there's a slight worry there. One guy that I sort of have circled on my cheat sheet that I'm a little more worried about is Amari Cooper. We just don't know what's going on in Cleveland, right? We just don't know the quarterback situation, how that's going to affect him. He has an injury history. So I look at him as a guy that he's not going that high in drafts, but I'm still leery about drafting him. I feel like there's always going to be another wide receiver or maybe a player at another position I'm going to want more than Amari Cooper this year just because of all the question marks.
Speaking of question marks, I have a lot about the Seahawks with Drew Lock at quarterback, and you go Russell Wilson, and you look at him in Denver with those two guys, Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. I feel like I have to fade all of these guys. I think it's not good for Jeudy and Sutton to adjust again to a new quarterback, and they've not been able to stay healthy here. Those are the major concerns there, and getting the chemistry down with Wilson, where Metcalf and Lockett, pretty much down to Drew Lock is not that good, and I don't trust him to get the ball enough to these guys, and I'm not going to rely on Geno Smith to do it either. Now,
I'm sorry to cut you off there, Vinny. One thing I wanted to add in, though, about Metcalf is just 3 games without Russ last year, 4.7 catches, 65.7 yards, 3 total touchdowns. I think he can score without Russ, but I don't know how much he's going to do otherwise, so maybe he gets a bigger downgrade in PPR leagues.
All right, another group of marquee receivers that we look at are tight ends, and we have some big name busts for you there in fantasy football for 2022. I'm going to go really big here for you, Matt. Darren Waller. You look at the acquisition of Davante Adams. We know that Waller has been Derek Carr's favorite target for a while, but here came Hunter Renfrow, and now is his old Fresno State buddy, Davante Adams. There's not a lot of vacated targets here. It's not like Bryan Edwards was doing anything last year. Waller also coming off an injury-riddled season. I just don't see him producing in that high-end tight end one the way we've seen before. Another guy I'd like to avoid also, TJ Hawkinson, just doesn't do a lot for me, especially with the Lions upgrading their receiving core. I think they're pretty good at wide receiver, and Jared Goff is going to look elsewhere. Hawkinson was disappointing for sure last year. I think he's a good inline blocking tight end. I just think you're going to get disappointing receiving results.
Yeah, I think Waller's definitely the scariest guy in those first 2 tiers just because he's coming off injuries, plural, back and knee. That's a worry. And like you said, Derek Carr loves throwing to Hunter Renfrow. We assume he's going to love throwing to Davante Adams. How exactly does this all work out for Darren Waller? I still think he's going to be big in the red zone, but those overall catches and the yardage, I think, could really go down. And you could see him finishing more like TE 7-8. He's still being drafted 4 or 5. That's a little bit of a worry. He's an overdraft candidate for sure. With Hawkinson, I think he sort of is what he is too. He's sort of the DJ Moore at tight ends in a way. Jared Goff isn't a big arm guy, so I think that helps Hawkinson. But at the same time, he seems to be just slotted into that tight end 6 spot, give or take a spot or 2, and he hasn't really earned it. And so it's fair to wonder, are we overdrafting this guy? Has Dalton Schultz overtaken him? Is Dallas Goedert going to overtake him? Is Dawson Knox or Hunter Henry or Pat Freiermuth or some of the Cole Kmet, are they going to break out and finish above him? So yeah, TJ Hawkinson, it's weird. He's boring. He's not someone you really think about that much. People who draft him just sort of wind up with him, but that's probably not a good thing. He's probably going a round or two too high.
Yeah, I think with tight end, the old adage kind of still applies here. Go for one of those guys early in the top 3 or 4, then wait for that value. And one guy I'm not going to be waiting for is Dawson Knox. You mentioned him a little bit. He's got O.J. Howard there now. I think the Bills are going to be more open with their offense here with now Gabriel Davis set up for a breakout season here with Stephon Diggs. They didn't get a lot from that number 2 or number 3 receiver situation last year. Now they also have Jameson Crowder. So I think those 2 guys are upgrades from what they had with Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley. Josh Allen likes to throw the ball downfield. he's going to look a little less to Dawson Knox, so that's why I'm avoiding him. Is there a guy out there maybe a little bit deeper that you would avoid?
Yeah, well, I don't like Mike Gaseki this year. I'm just worried about the new situation in Miami with Tyreek Hill there and how that's going to affect him. He's one of those guys that could go either way. He sort of was affected last year by a lack of touchdowns. That can always course correct. We saw that with Kyle Pitts only scoring 1. Cole Kmet didn't score at all. Those guys could easily score 6, and they'll outdo what they did last year. But I'm just worried about Miami in general and how they're the new offense and how it's all going to come together. Gaseki to me is a wild card. He could go either way. But because of that, I'm not looking to draft him. I think there's other tight ends that I would rather have before I draft Gaseki.
Well, there you have it. There's a look at the fantasy football bus here at Sporting News for the 2022 season. Thanks again, Matt, and check us out there with all our great content at Sporting News for your fantasy football draft team.